My parent was René Pinchart and Ludwina de Klerk Pinchart. My father was bringing his army or his troop through, and my mother was on a men's bicycle, and of course her skirts were way up. And so all the soldiers were whistling and saying, Mariette, Mariette. So she was furious and she was very unhappy about the whole thing. So she raced home and she was complaining to her mother about the whole thing. And about an hour later, my father walks in. He was looking for his godmother, and this was his godmother. So he was thrilled to see his godmother, and then he was thrilled to see the Mariette too, you know. But he was so handsome. Little by little, she decided, well, I guess she could be nice to him too. So it didn't take very long before they were pretty well involved. And then after he got back from Germany, they got married. My mother was 19, and my father must have been 29. He was in the Belgian army, and he was in like the West Point. He was teaching in the West Point of Belgium, in Brussels. He was teaching fencing at the time, but before he was teaching fencing, he was competing in all the decathlon things for the army. He came third in fencing. My mother was very ill for a number of years, so that when I was born, even though I was a 9-month baby, there was a lot to be desired. The skin was not formed completely between the fingers and the toes and around the ears and so on and so forth. I was only half baked, so to speak, and so my grandmother put me in the warming oven, you see, so that I would keep baking. In 1926, they came over from the United States to ask the Belgian government to send them somebody to help them form an Olympic team in fencing. And he was chosen to come. And he had always been fascinated about coming to the United States, so he accepted. My mother wasn't very happy about it, but they did come, and once my mother was here, she suddenly was healthy. Just fantastic the way she recouped. My mother wanted to be close to my father, so she stayed in Brussels, and I stayed in Maldegem with my grandmother. My grandmother was the most funny and delightful lady in the whole world. She's had the funniest sayings, and I'm still quoting her all the time. She really was a very bright light in my upbringing. My grandmother did a lot of reading, and so I learned to read very fast, and I learned to be on my own. From the time I was a little girl, they took me to school, in convent school, until I was 6, and then they took me to the United States when I was 6. And I went to school in New York for about 2 years, and then they decided that they couldn't really take care of me. They didn't have time enough for me, so they sent me back to my grandmother. I sort of remembered a trip going back. I went on a Belgian trip, the Red Star Line. I was put in charge with the captain, so he took care of me and saw that everything was okay. But all I cared about was getting to my grandmother, and that was the most important thing in my life. I went back to school, and then when I was 12, I came to the United States for 6 months, and we went to the Chicago World's Fair, as a matter of fact. I guess maybe they were testing the grounds to see whether I should stay here or not, but I wasn't happy, so they sent me back. Then I went to boarding school in Bruges with French nuns, and I was there for about a year. I didn't really like it there. Then I went to another boarding school in Eeklo. I was there for 4 years. And then in 1938, my grandmother told my mother and father, you better come and get her because something is happening here, and I'm sure it's going to be war, and you better come and get her. And even when my mother and father came to pick me up, I don't think I really knew what the heck was going on, you know. It seemed so far removed from what I knew. We drove to Le Havre and went on to the Normandy. And that was August 28, 1938. And 2 days later, Hitler went into Poland. So we left 2 days before everything started. New York was it wasn't a little town that I was in, but it was a town, and to come to the greatest city in the world, it was quite a change. It was hard. In the first place, I didn't really speak English very well, but they sent me to Cathedral High School, which was run by Catholic nuns, but instead of being 4 years, I did it in 3 years. We lived in the Fences Club. There were 1 million people around all the time. We couldn't speak French or Flemish because everybody was speaking English, so I guess maybe it forced me to speak English a lot faster than I would have otherwise. And it was very hard to get used to my parents because to me, they weren't really my parents. But nevertheless, I was a great student, and I was teaching everybody Latin, and I was teaching everybody geometry because I knew it and they didn't, and so I found myself teaching everybody. I was offered a scholarship to college at William and Mary, and I thought about it, but I thought, you know, I really don't know my mother and dad, and if I go away again, I'll never know them. And so I decided not to take it, which I regret now. So then I got a scholarship at Hunter College. My father was the fencing coach of the United States Olympic team. Every time they came to Europe, he used to give me lessons for the 2 months that I saw them every other year. And I had beautiful form, was a beautiful looking fencer. And when I was in Hunter, I was on the Hunter team. We did take the intercollegiates twice, 2 years in a row. And I came in second for the individuals. I didn't have the push or the will to get. I had missed it by 1 point. My father used to drive him crazy that I missed it by 1 point. I was a good student, but not a brilliant student, because I wasn't interested enough. I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be in other words, I was interested in the arts. But I did get my diploma for teaching also. And then when I got out of college, the war was over, and of course I couldn't get a job no matter what, because the guys were coming back and they needed to get those guys a job. I finally got a job as a French translator for Squibb International. So I worked there a couple of years, and then I decided that I was going to be a singer, so I started taking lessons. I had a beautiful voice. I had a lyrica spinto, so I got scholarships, even at Juilliard. I wanted to do opera, but along the way I had a lot of friends who were in opera, and I became very disillusioned because I noticed that it was a very tough game. It was not the idealistic thing that I was imagining. I saw all the terrible things that were happening to the people who were on stage, who were competing with one another and trying to make the other person fall out or something. And I got very, very disillusioned. But I didn't dare tell anybody that I was disillusioned and I couldn't go along. And for some reason, a psychological reason, obviously, I lost my voice. In the meantime, I went all over Europe and I got myself back together again, so to speak. I enjoyed Italy, Spain, France. You know, everywhere I went, I enjoyed it tremendously. And then I came back and I decided that I wanted to do something else. And this friend of mine, Martin Slattery, decided that what I should do, instead of be on stage, be behind stage. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. And so I got a job at one of the advertising agencies with the idea that I would be interested in doing some work for them in TV. First, all I did was type scripts, that's all. For about 6 months, I typed scripts for Norelco, you name it. Then we got Revlon. And when we got Revlon, they needed new people. And I was right in line. So I became production assistant. Carry the things that you do, you watch on stage, and you're sent to tell the people, no, you move this thing 4 inches this way. And okay, 4 inches that way. I worked very, very hard in pre-production. It all came very naturally to me. Somehow I had no problem whatsoever. It worked for me. Before you know it, I was asked to be an assistant producer. Well, an assistant producer does everything. And then the producer comes in and says, okay, this, that, and the other thing. This was with $64,000 question and $64 challenge, can do U.S. Steel, any number of productions. It was marvelous. The other thing was that I also was responsible for people who were on stage in the commercials and what they were wearing. I realized that I had a lot of background in that kind of thing anyway. So it worked out beautifully. But then when I had worked there about 3 years, all of a sudden the can-do scandal appeared, and overnight everything was over. And I was going to be a secretary again, and I thought, no, I can't do that. I worked as a costume designer then for TV and movies. Let me tell you, it's a schlepping game. You go to a meeting, you're in to see who they choose, and so you're spending time watching the guys see all the beautiful girls go by. And you're not supposed to say beans, right? You're just looking and you think, yeah. And so the guys are having a marvelous time watching all these beautiful girls go by. Then when they finally have chosen and the client has said okay, then you're allowed to say, okay, now you can call these girls and find out what their sizes are and what they don't think they look good in and what they think they look good in. Was a fascinating game. And I did have to belong to the union, which is one of the reasons why I was able to do Hollywood productions. I did 3 films. For instance, I worked for Paul Newman. He was a very, very nice guy. But we said, hello, Paul, and that was it. It was the same kind of thing with everybody. Very friendly on set, but afterwards I went my own way. So I did my job. I had my 2 little poodles, and I wanted to go home to them. My father passed away in 1970. He had cancer of the bone, which we weren't aware of until he fell when coming back from Europe from their 50th wedding anniversary. You still came off the plane on the outside in those days, and he came down and stumbled and fell. And then they discovered that he had something very wrong with his bones. I was doing Let's Scare Jessica to Death in Essex, Connecticut, and he was in Middletown, Connecticut. So I was able to go and see him every evening, and he lasted 2 months, and he was gone. Well, my mother wasn't very well, and she seemed to be unhappy. She was taking care of some of the animals, and I think she felt that it was too much for her, and I decided to come out. This was in 1978, and I realized that it was time to stay. So I decided to give up my business, and I came out here and stayed here. Then I realized that I needed my own place, so I designed the rest of the house. 1982, everything was all set. Then I got involved with Quail Botanical Gardens because I wanted to find out how to take care of plants in the California way. And I decided that a botanical garden should be the one to go to. But I became very involved and stayed with them for years. When I first came here, I started to plant trees and do all sorts of things, and had a very good Mexican gardener who was also very good at doing things not only in the garden but stone places, and I had several different ideas, and one of them was because the house was on a hill and there was quite a downslope, I saw to it that it was terraced. So I had the whole garden practically terraced. And then I started planting in different terraces. So it was really a 10-year proposition, but I enjoyed it, and it was good for me. I guess she had a little problem. Well, she had heart problems. She wanted in the worst way to be 91, but she never made it to 91. She made it to 90, and then she died about August 1991. I realized that I would not be able to keep my house on the Connecticut River. It was an old captain's house, 17-something, and right on the Connecticut River. It was a very, very desirable property. So I went back and stayed there for 2 or 3 months and put the house on the market. And I was lucky. I sold the house in a couple of months and did very well. I traveled all over the place once a year, usually for a couple of months. I really enjoyed traveling tremendously. I went to Alaska. I traveled all over the United States and fell in love with the United States, definitely. America has changed a lot, and I don't know that it's all for the better, but I guess that's true of all over the world. I mean, it's the same with Europe. Europe has changed tremendously, and certainly places like China and India. So I guess it was meant to be. It makes it fascinating, too, in a way. You know, it wasn't just us, it was everybody. I've had a good life. I can't complain too much. Somehow I managed. Thank you very much. Ciao.